And welcome to the Keith Barker channel, everybody. It's fantastic to have you here. I was looking at the blueprint for the CCNA, and in section 6, automation and programmability, it has some information about REST-based APIs. If you haven't yet seen the video on REST-based APIs that I did, check it out. It's like 8 minutes. You'll get a lot of value out of it. I thought, you know, what else we can do is we can also work on a little aspect of recognizing JSON, encoded data, and what that is. And a good way to do that is for us to actually take the RESTCONF idea, which, as a quick reminder, RESTCONF is a RESTful API that allows a computer, like a controller, or somebody running an application to interact with networking devices, to get information from them and to push information. We can manage large amounts of devices with just a single computer or two using automation, network automation. And RESTCONF is an example of a RESTful API, uses HTTPS for its transport and uses the same old HTTP commands like put and get to send and get information from the Cisco device. All right, so the objectives are, I want to walk you through the syntax for enabling RESTCONF on a Cisco router. Number 2, I want to share with you how you can use a CLI, the command line interface, like a PowerShell or a command prompt, with a little utility called CURL, client URL, to test it. And then I want to walk you through Postman. So one of my goals was, I thought, okay, how do we break this down to a point where virtually anybody who wants to, like you or I, could test this and also use a tool like Postman, which we'll talk about, to make it a lot easier. And so let's start off with the enabling it on the router, all those pieces, and then we'll take a closer look at the CLI and Postman. So here in this topology, I bring my face up a little bit. There we go. Hello. In this topology, I've got a single router that's in an emulator connected to my home local network. Now, if you have, this is a CSR router. I've also tested this in Cisco modeling labs, also with live gear. The key is you have to have a router that supports RESTCONF. So if you don't have a router where the iOS supports it, you won't be able to go ahead and use it. But so EVE-NG, Cisco modeling labs, or GNS3, or live gear, as long as you can reach that device. Let me walk you through the syntax for enabling RESTCONF. And I put it somewhere handy. Here it is. So here's the syntax for enabling RESTCONF on a Cisco device. Config T. So if you're brand new to Cisco, config T is how we get into configuration mode. And there's a What's Next Wednesdays series that you can join and take a look at. It's a playlist here on the YouTube channel for Keith Barker that walks through the basics. So we're creating a username. I'm giving him King Kong rights of level 15. I'm setting up a password of Cisco !23 with a capital C. So that's probably not new to anybody watching this video. And then I'm enabling HTTPS services on this router because RESTCONF, from our previous video, RESTCONF uses HTTPS as its transport. So if the router doesn't support HTTPS, that's a problem. I also use this command. And what this says is, Dear Mr. Router, when somebody connects to you using HTTP or the secure HTTPS, I want you to authenticate them, mean a fancy way of saying identify who they are, and use the local database to do it. Now, the local database on a Cisco router means the running config. So that user we created, admin, will satisfy that as long as we know the username and the password, and we'll use it with our RESTCONF commands. Then we're going to enable RESTCONF. This is the moment, my friend, where you're going to say, oh, my router doesn't support RESTCONF, or it does, but if it doesn't support RESTCONF, the RESTCONF API won't be able to interact with this device. And then for my lab, I'm just going to interface gigabit 1, and I'm giving an IP address that I can reach of .56. And then I did a no shutdown, and I also enabled a couple routing processes just because I wanted to have something to look at on that router. And then I also did a debug of IP HTTPS SSL error, and that was just so I could see. So what happens, the router has a self-signed certificate. And so if we try to access that, if we have a client that cares, it's going to say, whoa, I don't trust that CA, the certificate that was signed by itself, the router itself. And so be aware that if we put a debug like that on, that's going to help indicate, oh, here's the problem, and we need to fix it. And I'll show you how to do that as well. So all that's already in place in this environment right here. By the way, I had so much fun putting this together. So a couple weeks ago, somebody requested some network automation from the CCNA, and I've had a blast in putting this together. I've got it here somewhere. There we go. So this is the current router, and we just show IP interface brief like that. There we go. We have a gigabit 1 or gigabit 1 which has .56, and then I've got a loopback 0. And that's kind of small font. Sorry about that. We're going to do the rest of the work in RESTCONF, most of it. Okay, so let's go back and let's take a look at how we would now, once RESTCONF is enabled, how do you use this thing? And that's a good question. So the benefit, what is the benefit of an API? Let's talk about that for a moment. The benefit of an API is that we have a language of love that's understood by a computer or an application that's managing our network and the devices that it's managing. So if they both understand and agree and work with the same API, think of it like a computer's way of dealing with another device. However, as a network engineer, we may occasionally, including today, we may want to modify or tweak or control that API and use it from a tool to manage our network. And so it's good for us to be familiar with some of the commands and also some of the tools that we could use to leverage it. So let me share with you the first way we could actually use this RESTCONF API that's enabled here on this device. And that would be something like this. Let's go to a command prompt. Let me also bring up, I also started using this tool right here is VS Code. I'm not a programmer, but I'll tell you what, man, it's a great way to collect your thoughts. It's also a very amazing thing when you get there, not today, but like in a few weeks, a few months, a few years, when you want to start backing up that content and your code snippets up to GitHub. It's so easy with VS Code to do. So that's a new skill that I picked up in the last month or so. Been very, very helpful. But anyway, so this is the configuration for getting RESTCONF enabled. And here is how we could start to test it. Now, curl, I think the acronym CURL is client URL. Basically, think of it at like, instead of going to a browser and issuing https:// and the URL, you can do it right here from a command line. Now, if it's not going to be pretty if we went to Google with curl from the command line, because all that results are going to show up, at the CLI with just like, what is this like bombardment of letters and numbers and symbols? So, but for testing like RESTCONF, it can be used. So this basically, here's what this says. This says I want to use curl. That's the client. I'm just using it here from Windows 10. CURL space -k. -k says, and you can also do a curl space -- help, and they'll give you context sensitive help. But what the -k says is, hey, there might be a self-signed certificate, and so, or we may be using an older version of SSL or something. Go ahead and ignore that and just keep on going. That's why I have the K there. And then we have https:// 192.168.1.56/RESTCONF space, and then because I need to authenticate, I'm going to use the -u, that stands for user, and then in quotes, my username / password, the key value pair of my user and password. And if we just take that, boom, and right click to copy it and go to a command line interface, I made it real big so it'd be easy to see, and paste it in and press enter, boom, that just went out to that Cisco router via RESTCONF, asked it some basic questions about, are you there? Are you listening? And this is the response back. Now, we could continue to do that with a lot of commands. And this is, I'm talking about if you're new to RESTCONF, as I am, I'm not a developer, not a programmer, and you want to just enable it and just verify from the CLI that you've got basic RESTCONF capabilities working on that device, this is your command. Right here, just swap out your IP address with the IP address that you've configured on your reachable device that supports RESTCONF. You get that response, you're in good shape. Now, we could continue on that discussion and start using curl with all these additional options, which are basically using modules. Think of a module like a grouping or a setting of options that the router knows about. And there's lots of different modules that we could use. And then within each of those modules, there's information we could retrieve or put based on those. Like, I want to see all the interfaces. I want to see all the interfaces based on the IETF format. I want to see, I want to create a new interface. And so all these are options that we could use at the CLI. However, painful. Take it from me, painful, because they come back and it's like, well, what would be easier, I think, is to use a tool like a graphical user interface tool that could allow us to put these URLs in, something a little better than a browser because we have to authenticate as well, but something way better than the CLI. And so that way something better, that's something way better, easy for me to say, is called Postman, which I used a few weeks, like a few months ago. And I'm on a new machine now, so I reinstalled it. You know what I forgot? Well, let me tell you about Postman. So Postman is a tool that'll allow us to take those APIs, like a URL, https:// just like what we did with curl, but do it in a graphical user interface, and then allow us to send those commands right from this graphical user interface called Postman. It also has incredible ability to help us tweak and tune as far as what goes in the header for those requests, or what data types are we expecting. It's really handy. I was going somewhere with this. Oh, yeah. So thanks for hanging in there with me. So a few months ago, I was using this. I logged on. I got a free account at, I just did a Google search for Postman, went to the official website, got a free account. And I didn't realize at the time that whatever I created, like little samples and test API calls I was making as testing things, it saves them for me in my profile. So I installed a brand new copy of Postman this morning. And when I logged in, all my old commands were there. I thought, that's pretty darn cool. That way you can practice with an API, like RESTCONF, which we're doing. And you can go to different machines and it'll synchronize with the web and all your commands are there. So pretty darn handy. I encourage you to do at least the curl from the command line. And then if you're going to do more than just 1 or 2 commands, use Postman. It's free. And let me show you exactly how it works. Piece of cake. You're going to love this. So what I did was I created a grouping here called give the config a rest. And in this give the config a rest setting, I've got a whole bunch of different RESTCONF related commands. So check out what I did here. I have https:// and then my IP address of that router, router 1, /RESTCONF, all by itself. Now, the problem is when we did that command from the CLI a few moments ago, I had to put in this username, admin, and the password for it to work. So here on Postman, it's pretty simple. All we do is we put in the URL. Just think of it like a browser, or you put in the website you want to go to, the URL, or sometimes referred to as the URI, Uniform Resource Identifier. I'm old, so I still call it a URL sometimes. But if we put that in and then we click on authorization right here just below, you can specify how you want to authenticate. And I just selected basic authentication. And then I put in the password. I put the username admin and the password Cisco bang23. That way, when we press enter here in a moment, it's just like doing it from the CLI, except it's going to remember that information for us, and it's a little more pleasant to work with. You can also use dark mode here in case you're you want the dark mode. That's also an option here in Postman. But these are the defaults. So if we click on send, what it's doing right now, it just issued that command https:// 192.168.1.56/RESTCONF. It used this username and password, and that's it. Everything else are the defaults. And if we look at the output down here, see this output? Let's do a compare and contrast real quick. This is like, let me bring it up here. There we go. You see how the output, the data, operations, Yang library version, etc. Same data, just a more pleasant way to work with and handle these APIs. So a couple things so far. We've enabled RESTCONF on a router. Boom. We did a quick test with this command, with this HTTPS query at the CLI with curl, and also from a little utility called Postman. And actually, Postman is not such a little utility. It's freaking amazing, as we'll see coming up. So I'd like to show you a couple other examples. Under capabilities, I preset these so I could do them faster in a demo, but all the data is right here. So under capabilities, I went to HTTPS, the IP address, RESTCONF data. Think of data as the root where everything begins, and everything after that, we're going to specify the additional information that we're after. We might be specifying a module, like, hey, use this module, and then we'll look at these interfaces. Or use this module and show me everything that's within the grouping of router or ospf or whatever else you want your application to check on or look at. So here we're just looking at the capabilities, and also under authorization. I'll come to authorization in a minute. So we're still using the same authorization as far as admin and Cisco 123 or !23. We'll click on send. Now here's where it gets fun. And I say that because this is like, you've heard of Baskin-Robbins 31, or is it Baskin? When I was growing up, Baskin-Robbins had like 31 flavors of ice cream. Well, with RESTCONF, which is based on its predecessor, netconf, there are hundreds and hundreds of modules that we could call on Some are Cisco specific, some are the version of the iOS that we're running specific, some are IETF more generic. So the range of what we could call on and what we could look for is almost limitless here as far as working with RESTCONF. Think of it like the router with hundreds of potential ears that are all listening. And then whatever we send in, we're going to specify through our API calls, we'll specify the module. And then the router will say, okay, great, boom, I get it, this module. And then what specifically would you like from that module? And then it can go down further and we can get interface counters or statistics or configuration elements, whatever we're looking for based on the person who wrote the program or the controller that's managing this Cisco device. All right, so that's the command right there. If you want to issue that right from the CLI, you can do a curl -k, meaning don't bother about worrying about the SSL things, the problem with the self-signed certificate, that string, and then -u, and then in quotes, admin : and the password for the authentication. So you don't have to use Postman, but once you use it, you're going to want to keep going. All right, so variables. Let's talk about variables next. I discovered something amazing, and that's this. It's a very good chance that we are going to have like lots of devices that we're testing with. And if we have to manually put in an IP address of 20 or 30 different devices, that might not be too handy. So we can use a variable for the host address. We can use a variable for the port. We can use other variables as well. I'd like to show you right here in Postman how that's leveraged. It's really simple to set up. Let me show you. So here in this GET request, it's HTTP and it's : // and then in double curly brackets, the word host, end curly brackets. If I hover over that, it knows somehow magically that that variable, because it's identified as a variable with the curly brackets, is at 192.168.1.56. So when we do our request, it'll simply read as, okay, HTTPS : that IP address, and then the rest of the string. And the way we set those up is over here on the upper right. If you click on the little, oh, my face is in the way. Let me get the other way. Over here on the upper right, if you click on the gear icon, here we have these environment variables. I have one called rest demo. And all I did was I put the username, the password, and the host inside of that environment variable, of that environment setting. And that way, anytime it calls on the username or password or host, it can just pull them right from here. And that way I don't have to do it again and again and again. So that's the magic of not having to repeat the same authentication information for every single one. So if we did a send here, that's the same capabilities request we did just a few moments ago. Exactly the same, except now it's using the variable in our string, but the actual end result is the same. Okay, now there's a lot of choices here with which modules we want to call on. I'm not a programmer, and so I would probably rely on something that was a sample or a pre-baked if I wanted to go through and start searching. But here's an if we with the capabilities here, one of those capabilities was this module called Cisco iOS XE-native. And so if we simply send that, and I'm including the authentication with admin and Cisco ! 23, it's showing me in XML format the output based on that module. So XML, I got to tell you something about XML. Back in the 80s, before wow, there goes my mic. I'm moving to a lapel mic, by the way. I'm going to test it out for my new studio so I can move around. In any event, back in the 80s, when I was first working with Novell, that was before I got into Cisco. Novell, you're going way back there. Well, yeah, so I was working with Novell, and I went to they called it Brain Share every year for Novell. And as part of that, I took one course, and it was on HTML programming, and it used XML. So you have open tags and close tags, like greater than symbol, less than symbol, and then when you close it off with that name, you use a slash. And it's like, wow, I'm writing HTML using XML. It's great stuff. And so many years later, that information is useful. However, that's just one format that we can use for plain text data is XML. And a lot of web pages and so forth use it. However, it's not the what do you call it? The fan favorite. If we're talking about data and APIs, we're moving more and more to JSON. And that's JavaScript, or was it JSON? Notation. JavaScript O notation. What does the O stand for? The O stand for? I don't know. So somebody can type that in. JSON. Anyway, it's just a way of representing the data. And instead of using the greater than, less than symbols, and the slashes, it uses the curly brackets, and then the object, and then a comma if there's another object, and then some arrays, that's a bracket, open and closed. And so in CCNA, one of the tasks here is interpret JSON encoded data. Like, what's the format for that? So as we continue here, and I give you some additional examples of using RESTCONF, we can actually change. We can specify in the header, hey, instead of this XML stuff, can we see the format, the plain text in JSON? And we'll do that coming up. All right, so back here, this is an example. See, the output is in XML. That's also showing here. If we do looking for just router basic information, this is the using the native module again, looking for router. So basically it says, okay, here's the open tag of router, and then all the way down to the close tag of router, and everything in between regarding that Cisco router that I brought up an hour ago. And then if we wanted to search for ospf, all this is the same URL, same module, just different specifics. Now we're looking for router ospf. So there's the basic details about the ospf related configuration based on that module. Now, what if we wanted counters? What if we wanted to know all the neighborships? What if we wanted to know more details? We could simply choose a different module that includes that additional information that the Cisco router can then extract and send back via the HTTP GET request that we issued. So they're HTTP commands, and we're using HTTPS for security for our transport. So here's an example of getting interface information via XML. So the URL is the same, it's just changed the last part to interface. So we'll notice the XML format here. And then if we wanted to see it in JSON, here's how we do it. Now, before I press go, it's the same URL. The IP address of the router, RESTCONF data, the root, the module we're using, and then the interface option for those for that section of the config. But under headers, what I did was I simply added this one, except application/yang-data+json. Now, if we look at the previous one, I'll go back to headers. In the previous one, I didn't have that specified. It didn't specify JSON, so it came back as XML. But this one, which specifies in the header, except application/yang-data+json, if I click on send, same data, but now it's going to be formatted in JSON with the curly brackets and then the key value pairs, and then so the curly brackets represent an object and the brackets represent an array, and you can nest them. But here, I can't tell you how many times in the last 2 months I've had to count curly brackets. And you might say, Keith, what do you mean? Oh, this is, by the way, what my hair looks like without product. I just got out of the shower. So I've taken a few exams recently, and in part of the objectives in CCNA was interpret JSON encoded data. And so there's rules about how JSON works, including starting with the curly bracket. And then if there's multiple objects, you're going to have commas. And if you have an open bracket for an array, you need to have a closed bracket. So if there's 14 open curly brackets, there should be 14 closed curly brackets. And there should be commas inside of those groupings if they're going to be correct JSON format. So with JSON, it doesn't really care about the spaces. Like, take a look at this. The spaces are just for us, really. And how it has these organized. Let me scroll down. Yeah, it has these spaced, like the open bracket, then a space. Spaces don't matter in JSON. They're just for our convenience. Now in YAML, they matter. But that's a little beyond the scope of CCNA because they ask you about JSON format. So the spacing actually doesn't matter, but the actual opening curly brackets, opening brackets, closing brackets, and commas, that would be a good skill to recognize from a pick list. Hey, which of these is valid JSON format? All right, let's continue. Now I'm going to move to a different type. So previously, in this one, I was using this module right here, which is the Cisco iOS XE native. And in this one, I just chose a different module, which is the ietf-interfaces. So out of that capabilities command, I think there was over 200 options there as far as modules we could choose from. So if we click send here, and I'm also doing the authentication still, it hasn't changed. Now it's showing us in JSON format because I still have we go back to headers, I still have the JSON option in the header request. That's why it's feeding it back to me in JSON. And here is the output. So if you notice here, the content is slightly different because we're using a slightly different module. Let's do another one. Here's yet another module. This is the Cisco iOS XE interfaces-OPER module. And this is very cool because it can give us statistics on the interfaces. If we click on send here, oh, by the way, ask me how I know all these. It's like trial and error. I just did the capabilities and looked through them and thought, oh, these look good, that looks good. And then I tried them and then I get an error. It's like, what am I missing? Oh yeah. So it's just a matter of picking and choosing till I got the ones that I wanted. But look at this. This is showing us the interfaces with the module called Cisco iOS XE interfaces-oper, that module. And here we have the control plane. Now, if you're in CCNA studies, you won't have to worry about the control plane yet. But as you get onto the professional level, the control plane is a logical interface that is taking a look at all traffic trying to come to the device itself for processing. So if somebody's telnetted in or SSH'd in or has APIs coming in and out that the router has to process itself, we can actually put control plane policing on the logical control plane to protect the router. That way, if it has 48 interfaces, we can protect the actual control plane itself, regardless of which interfaces that traffic is coming in if somebody's trying to do a DOS attack, for example, against us. All right, so that's the control plane interface. If we scroll down, there are more interfaces. Let me here's gigabit 1, fantastic. And if we scroll down, there's the details. There's in octets, which is a fancy way for saying how many bytes in, and in unicast and so forth, and out, fantastic. All right, so that's an example of just yet a different module. Now, why does this matter? If you and I were writing a script that was going to go out and query or look for or push information, we could use these various modules with a router that's enabled with RESTCONF, and we could write an application like a Python script that's calling on these modules and then making changes, taking information in, based on that information, writing out data. So that's beyond the scope of what we have to do for CCNA, but understanding the output here. In fact, let me ask you a question. What is the data format for this output? I'll give you 3 choices. YAML, XML, or JSON. It's JSON because it starts with that curly bracket. And then also because it states right here that it's JSON. So even if we chose XML, guess what? It's still JSON because of the formatting. All right, let's do a couple more. Here's interfaces operations, that module, but looking at just gig 1 only. So I just simply add the right parameters to the tail end of that URL. I'm still doing authentication. We'll click on send, and that'll give us the details just on gigabit 1. So we don't have to look at all the interfaces, just gigabit 1. And then if we want to look at interface get 0, I just swapped it out with interface 0 here in this URL, and that's showing us the details for interface loopback 0. Okay, so last piece here, and what is difficult to do from a command line, and is to write. You want to change something. So here's what I did. I looked at the output here of the interface loopback 0, and I just basically copied. I'm sorry, I went up to ietf-interfaces. Yep, I went to ietf-interfaces, and I went to loopback 0 here, and I just copied this. And all the way down to here, right there, that is perfect JSON format for pushing this information if you wanted to. So instead of having to put all the correct amount of curly, open curly and close curly and everything else, I just took what the router fed me, and then I went to this post example, and I recreated it with tweaking the values. And I don't think before this morning I've ever done this with a Cisco router I stood up by myself. I mean, I played with the DevNet sandbox and I've done other things, but as far as like a router that I brought up from scratch, enabled RESTCONF, like I showed you how here, and then doing it, I don't recall ever doing it before this morning. And here's my point. If I can do it, you can do it. And I studied for the CCNA and also for Encore, which I've passed enough to be able to pass those exams. But preparing for this gave me a real opportunity to practice more and verify what works and what doesn't work. And that's the real secret. My hope is that you'll take this basic configuration of right here of how to enable SSL and how to set up a user account and enable RESTCONF on a device that supports it in EVE-NG or GNS3 or Cisco Modeling Labs or Live Gear if you have it that supports it, and then try at least this one command, a curl right from your command line so you can verify that it works. And if you never get to Postman, I'm okay with that too, but if you do try it, I think you'll like it. And now here's where Postman is really helpful. In this post example, I'm going to HTTPS, same IP address, RESTCONF data, and I'm using this module, ietf-interfaces : interfaces. And then what I'm going to do is I went to body, and I simply pasted. Wait a sec, Keith. You mean you took the output of another interface, you pasted it, and then you modified the values? Yes. Yes, I did. So right here, we're just going to create loopback 5, and I specify the type and enabled true. I specify the IP address, so open bracket here. That represents the beginning of an array, which basically is specifying the IP address and the netmask. And before we do this, let's go verify that that interface doesn't exist. Let's go back here. I was about to go to the CLI. I was about to go back to the router and say, let's take a look. But we can take a look right here. If we go back to this one, I can ask via RESTCONF. Boom. And there's loopback 0 and gigabit 4. So the last interface is loopback 0. There is no loopback 5. So if we go to this one, we're going to do a post. See up here in the top left? We're doing a post, not a get. And let's take a look at the headers real quick. So I specified the content type as yang-data+json. For authentication, I'm using the model that we talked about that's being inherited. And under the body, here's what's going to be sent. So I'm going to click on send. All right, it's not too fanfare-y, but look at this. The status 201 created, that means it worked. And now you might say, well, Keith, how do you just did a post with RESTCONF and say you created this loopback 5. How do you know? No need to go to the command line. That's the thing I want to just get in your minds, is that once you have automation set up and you have a program with a nice, beautiful interface that's calling the shots, boom, 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 thousands of them potentially every minute, there's no need for you, and sorting out that data and providing that data for you. The need to go to the command line is maybe a comfort feeling, but in the future, it's not going to be needed unless you're doing some serious troubleshooting on a router that just went belly up or something. All right, so let's go back to interfaces. I'm going to go to this one right here. It's using the ietf-interfaces module. Click on send. Previously, when we ran it, loopback 0 was the last interface. So there's loopback 0, and there's loopback 5. And let's do it again. So I'm just going to take that same one, and I'm going to create loopback 99, and let's give it the IP address. You know what the fun thing about syntax that works? The key word there is it works. You don't have to reinvent it, which is a great reason why we might want to use things like VS Code and GitHub. Make our scripts. Don't include your passwords, by the way. That's a lesson I learned kind of the hard way. But save your code, and that way you can replicate it whenever you need to. So this is loopback 99. I'm going to go ahead and click on send. Drum roll, please. We got a message saying it was created. Go back to ietf-interfaces, send that RESTCONF command, and now we have loopback 99. I'll tell you what, it's pretty fun. Let me make sure. Let me make sure I have all the pieces covered that I wanted to. I wanted to share with you in this. It was going to be a premiere, but turned into a live stream because I ran out of time. Yeah, there's not too much of a substitute for labbing stuff up, and that goes for anybody studying packet tracer or whatever you have. So we enabled RESTCONF, walked through that, check. We tested RESTCONF at the CLI. That got boring pretty quick. However, I did show you the syntax, and I'd encourage you to try that if you have a RESTCONF capable device. I installed Postman this morning, and then I simply, with some capability that I saw inside of RESTCONF, I simply created some URLs and tested them. Now, there's also in the DevNet sandbox, there is iOS routers, XE routers that are available. You can test against those. I think there's other videos out there about that. At the CCNA level, which is our focus here, that's probably beyond the scope of what you have to do, because really the blueprint is saying interpret JSON encoded data. Check. With the curly brackets, the commas, the brackets, the open and close have to match up. Make sure you're not missing a comma anywhere, otherwise it won't work correctly. Or if you're missing a closing bracket, it won't work. And also in our previous video on RESTCONF as a RESTful API, we described the characteristics of REST-based APIs, including CRUD, create, read, update, and delete, and other HTTP verbs, like we just did one here, which was post, and the data encoding, the formatting, which includes JSON. So that is it for this presentation of the back half of the RESTCONF. I wanted to give you some ability to actually try this, see it, better understand it, and have some fun with it with some commands that work. I'll tell you what I'll do. Also, I will go back to this video sometime in the next 48 hours, and I'll take all the commands that I just did inside of Postman, because the other variable was the authentication. So I'll mention that as well. But I will post those in. That way you can go back to this video, go down to the description, and not just say, I wonder what that command was. You can have them and practice it and see it at work. All right, automation is it's not just coming, it's here. And it's important to be aware of. Now, somebody asked, well, if we are going to do automation, why am I learning about spanning tree at the command line? Why am I learning about routing protocols at the command line? Why am I learning? It's like, you know what? The reason we're learning it, two things. Number one, they want you to know it. Cisco wants you to know it. And secondly, when automation doesn't work, it's really tough to troubleshoot or correct an automation problem if you don't know how the underlying technology works. So if you're not familiar with how VTP works, well, VTP is a bad example for CCNA. So if you're not familiar with how ospf works, or how routing protocols work, or static routes, or floating static routes, or IPv6 static routes, it's not going to help you too much to automate all day and all night if you don't understand the pieces that are being pushed in or pulled out and how the network actually works. So it's a stepping stone. All right, I want to remind everybody that the fundamentals, the meat and potatoes, are critical to know, and they'll serve you well. And with that, I'm going to play a little outro music, and then I'll be back in just a few moments and take some live questions if you have any right here. And then if you want to, we'll jump in the Discord server afterwards in the voice chat room. All right, I'll see everybody back in just a few moments. Thanks, everybody.
What you're putting in, all your hopes and efforts are all in vain.